There's a lot of things in this old world that just do not make sense. Like why there's so few believers on the firing line, while so many others sit the fence. But if you want to know where the Word of God stands, and believe it wants to use your feet and hands, it's time to take your faith out of the seats and into the streets, and come along with me. If you only look, then you will see on WCNTV.
Well, hello and welcome to today's WCNTV. I'm Rob Pugh, your host. And the question we're going to be looking at today is America headed toward civil war? There's no question that America is more divided today than ever before in my lifetime. While plans to turn America into a communist state and part of a one-world government have been slowly moving forward for over 100 years now, much of the hatred and division really got amped up during the Obama administration. That is where we saw the support and encouragement of radical Islam, mass migration of Muslims into Western countries, including the U.S., as part of Islamic Jihad, the birth of the Antifa movement, and the encouragement of civil unrest, as Obama and his cohorts used their community organizing skills and Saul Alinsky tactics to divide and conquer. We saw the birth of the Black Lives Matter movement, bringing about more racial division and hatred than we've seen in decades. We saw the war against the police and the rule of law, the weaponizing of the IRS and other federal agencies against Christians and conservatives. And Obama traveled the world to apologize to our enemies for America just being America. College students started demanding safe spaces on their campuses where free speech was no longer allowed. Young white people being ashamed and apologizing for just being white, young men being ashamed of and apologizing for just being men, and young Americans being ashamed of and apologizing for just being Americans. The idea of sodomite marriage being recognized as the law of the land after one Supreme Court decision, effectively wiping out all of our state's marriage protection amendments. This, of course, has led to things like drag queen story time, and the mass perversion of young children in public schools and libraries with deviant sex ed classes. Teachers and parents now encouraging children to try homosexuality for themselves and to question their very genders. We also saw a huge increase in those who now believe they are transgender. We've seen the removal of America's historical monuments and statues, as well as the rewriting of history textbooks. All of these things are no coincidence, and they didn't just happen by chance. It's a planned agenda of the left, which no longer even tries to hide its true intent, which is to bring America down, bring about a new world order, a one world government, and turn the United States from a representative republic into a Marxist communist state. One need only look at the sheer unwarranted and unrealistic hatred the leftists have for Donald Trump and how they've tried their hardest since he was elected to bring him down, to understand that no matter who wins the 2020 elections, there's going to be massive changes and massive civil unrest in our streets in less than 1 year now. If Trump wins, the left is going to go stark raving mad. And if one of the Democratic Socialists takes the White House, we're going to see persecution against Christians, conservatives, males, and especially white Christian conservative males like we've never seen before. So get ready, folks, because I believe civil war is coming. Our guest today believes it's already here. Today, I want to welcome Brannon Howse as our guest on WCNTV. Brannon is the president and founder of Worldview Weekend and Worldview Weekend Broadcast Network, which hosts radio and TV programs. He's the author of 13 books, and he's been a guest on more than 2,000 radio and television programs. You may have seen him on Fox News with Bill O'Reilly, or maybe MSNBC. Now, Brannon believes that civil war is not just coming to America, he believes it's already here. He'll soon be releasing a new docu-movie titled Siege, which will plainly present the clear and present dangers pushing America to the brink of a Marxist Islamic revolution, civil war, World War III, and globalism. Now, it's likely that most of you watching today already know much of this information, but I'm also pretty sure we're going to learn quite a bit today. I'd also like to encourage you to share today's program with those around you, your friends, family, church family, as many as you can, because America needs to wake up to what's happening right before our very eyes. So, Brannon, welcome to the program this morning, today.
It's great.
Are you there?
Great to be with you. Thanks for having me on.
Thanks for being here. How are you doing?
I'm great. I just got off radio and jumped right on with you, so it's a full day.
You're a busy man.
Well, not any busier than you are, so thanks for having me.
So, when is Siege coming out? Do you have a new docu-movie?
It'll be out. It'll be out the first week of December, or around the end of the first week of December. It's 8 hours and 22 minutes.
Wow.
It was supposed to be 6 hours, like Sabotage was 6 hours. It was supposed to be 6 hours, but it turned into 8 hours and 22 minutes. And that's a fast-paced 8 hours and 22 minutes. If there was a wasted sentence, it got dumped. I mean, the whole purpose was to make this, again, kind of like watching a Tom Clancy movie, but that's why we call it a docu-movie. And it's very, very fast-paced. I have former FBI, former CIA, two former CIA agents, FBI, former Department of Homeland Security officer, former KGB agent. I mean, it is loaded up with experts and people. And the subtitle of Siege is The Clear and Present Dangers Pushing America to the Brink of a Marxist Islamic Revolution, Civil War, World War III, and Globalism. And we make the case that we already are involved in a civil war, and we already are involved in World War III. Now,
yeah, it's already happening.
We have a former FBI agent who sits at this very news desk who said, that's what the FBI agent says that you'll see in the trailer. He thinks the Civil War has already started. Daniel Greenfield says the Civil War has already started. And former CIA operations officer and chairman of the EMP task force, Dr. Peter Pry, says World War III started in the summer of 2018 when Russia and China hacked into our power grid. So we make the case with experts, again, former FBI, former CIA, former DHS, and experts on communism and Marxism and Islam, that we're already involved in a civil war. We're already involved in World War III. It's a new kind of Cold War. It's a new kind of Cold War. It's a new way of warfare. And the new way of warfare is hacking, it's cyber hacking, it's EMP, it's attacking our critical infrastructure, and it's also economic. We have Kevin Freeman on talking about the economic war that we're already in, which we can talk about. And then as far as the Civil War goes, people say, well, really, I don't see that. Well, as Daniel Greenfield says in the docu-movie, when you're shooting at each other, that's how a civil war ends. That's how a civil war ends. So we're already involved in a civil war. The deep state is trying to overthrow a president, have a coup. We are involved in a civil war right now within America, while we're also being attacked with a new kind of Cold War and economic war.
Yeah, and it's not something that just happened overnight, is it, Brannon?
No, it has been a long march through the institutions. And Sabotage was the first movie, 6 hours. They can watch the trailer for that at sabotagethemovie.com. So if they want to understand how we got to this point, I deal with it in sabotagethemovie.com. And then the follow-up is Siege. Siege is 8 hours and 22 minutes. And this has been a long march through our institutions, media, education, government, and religion. Major long march through the institutions. And as we point out in Sabotage and then further describe in Siege, The Islamists in America would not be making the headway they're making if it wasn't for the Marxists. If the Marxists had not partnered with them, promoted them, funded them, they would be going nowhere. In fact, many of these people, whether it's Ilhan Omar of Minneapolis, Talita Shalib of Michigan, and others we could name, these people were Marxists, many of them, before they discovered, oh, yeah, I'm also Islamic. But if it wasn't for the Marxists, they wouldn't be going anywhere. So that's why we call it a Marxist Islamic revolution. The Marxists are driving it. The globalist, George Soros, globalist money is driving this. And it's been a long process. In fact, in Siege, I show how communism has marched across the globe, starting with Lenin and his little band of revolutionaries in 1917. And they marched around the globe. And Lenin, before he died in 1924, said that we will take Eastern Europe, then we'll take Asia, then we will surround the United States, and we will collapse the United States from within. Is that not what they've done? That's exactly what they've done. Now you would say, well, how did they do that? And in the movie Siege, I explained to you how they did it, largely because we allowed them to do it as a nation. We won World War II, and then we went to the table for negotiations, and we gave Eastern Europe to Stalin. And then we decided we would do nothing when the communists decided they were going to move in and take over China. We decided we were not going to do anything. As the Secretary of State said, well, let's just let the dust settle. Well, it did. It settled in what was called the Korean War and then Vietnam. And so we let them take China and put 700 million under the enslavement of communism in China. There are now 1.5 billion people living in China. We gave them Eastern Europe. We gave them China. Then we lost to them in the Korean War. It was one general who testified before Congress that they were ordered to lose the war. One reason they were ordered to lose the war is because we had communists that had infiltrated the State Department, the Treasury, the White House. This is not conspiracy. This is what the U.S. Senator from your state, Joseph McCarthy, was trying to warn, but it turned out later he was right. More than he knew, because there was a project that started in the 1940s that ran up to the 1980s, known as the Venona Project, that the Army started, which was the predecessor to the National Security Agency. And we were intercepting communications from the Soviets to their agents here in the U.S. and decoding them. And those have been released. They were declassified and released in 1995. And guess where they found? Guess where our government found Soviet agents? In the White House, at the State Department, in the Treasury, in key places. Look, Americans have forgotten history or didn't ever know it. We actually executed a husband and wife for being Soviet agents. We have multiple people that were convicted of being Soviet agents. It wasn't conspiracy. That's what you've led to believe. Oh, that was red baiting. That's conspiracy. That's anti-communist propaganda. No, we actually executed people for this. It was later found out that how guilty they were, even more than we even knew. But McCarthy didn't even know about the Venona Project. So what I'm telling you is we've lost to communism on the global scale because we didn't define the enemy. We didn't fight to win. And then every time they wanted us to rush to the table to compromise, we would rush to the table to compromise. And they said that's what we would do. So we would take Eastern Europe, then Asia, surround the United States, and collapse them from within, said Lenin. And now we're surrounded by Cuba, just 90 miles from Florida. We have Venezuela, that is 1,264 miles as the crow flies from northern Venezuela, Caracas, Venezuela, to Miami. We now have 2 nuclear bombers that have landed last year in Venezuela, Russian nuclear bombers in Venezuela. We have 5,000 armed man pads, as they are called, floating around Venezuela. They've gone and turned to a completely neo-Marxist revolution in Venezuela. They've got hyperinflation. The middle class is eating out of dumpsters. Our head of the CIA at the time, Pompeo, said to Chris Wallace, he's now Secretary of State, but he said to Pompeo said to Chris Wallace on Fox News that in Venezuela, you've got Cuba, you've got Russia, you've got Iran, you've got Hezbollah. They're all there in Venezuela. I mean, that's not that far away. Back in 2010, if you go back into my archives, back in 2010, I was warning about Venezuela and a potential Cuban Missile Crisis, but this time from Venezuela. Well, now they've got 2 missile bombing planes, huge planes from Russia that have landed there with missiles, nuclear bombers. in Venezuela. Americans are oblivious to the fact that we have been surrounded, and now they're trying to collapse us from within from a Marxist deep state. And many of these players, Comey, who was at the FBI, liked communist Reinhold Niebuhr. He quoted him. He had a Twitter handle of Reinhold Niebuhr, who was a religious communist Marxist. Brennan liked him. He was head of the CIA. Brennan said he voted for Gus Hall, who was head of the Communist Party USA. So you've got a FBI director that likes a communist, Reinhold Niebuhr. You got an a CIA director, Brennan, who voted for Gus Hall, a communist presidential candidate. I mean, you got a Hillary Clinton who liked to quote Reinhold Niebuhr. You like Barack Obama who liked Reinhold Niebuhr. And then you bring in the church in America, as I reveal in my book, Marxianity. And what do you have? And you can get this at Marxianity.com. You have one of the biggest church planners in America who's destroying the Southern Baptist Convention, destroying the Presbyterian Church of America, Tim Keller, who also likes to go around quoting Marxist, but doesn't tell his audience he's quoting Marxist. He calls them theologians, Reinhold Niebuhr, Gustav Gutierrez, and others. So there is a connection that we make in the movie Siege between the deep state, Marxist deep state in our government, and the evangelical deep state that are united with their Marxist thought leaders. I mean, this is 8 hours and 22 minutes, and I've just scratched the surface.
Yes, and Sabotage was excellent, by the way.
Thank you.
Now, a lot of folks may think that this is conspiracy theory. It's all just wild, crazy nonsense. You need to wake up. You need to know what's happening. And we have a preview of Siege. It's coming out next week. And we would like to let you just take a little bit of time here and take a look at this preview. It's about 25 minutes long, but it is worth our time to watch. So, Jared, if we're able to roll that, let's take a look and see for yourself.
There's an attempted revolution going on right now. The Islamists, the Marxists are trying to overthrow our form of government. The globalists are trying to overthrow our form of government, a constitutional republic, and have a revolution. I believe we're involved in a civil war in America right now.
Have been saying for several years, as we discussed earlier, Brannon, that I believe we're in a civil war and have been for a while.
But we do have a civil war. And why do I call it a civil war when there's no fighting in the streets? What is a civil war really about? It's not about the guns. When you are actually shooting each other, that's how a civil war ends. That's the beginning of the end, one way or another. A civil war begins with politics. We had organizations within the government, some people call them the deep state or the shadow government, whatever you want to call them, who are determined that they're the ones who are going to be in power. Sometimes they're subtle about it when they're within the bureaucracy. Sometimes they're very obvious about it, such as when federal judges announced that President Trump has no right to set any policies whatsoever that they disagree with. That's effectively a civil war. There may not be any shooting, but there's a power struggle. There's a struggle for control of the government.
Would you agree with me that we're involved in a civil war already in America?
Yes, I think that is a way to describe it. I think of it more as the government is itself divided. There's the president in the White House, really at war, if you want to call it that, certainly in a struggle with the rest of the government, with very few allies anywhere else throughout the government. So the government itself is divided along the battle lines you could describe, I believe, as a civil war.
We've heard in the media lately terms like coup thrown around, and I don't think that's an understatement. I think it was an administrative legal coup attempt. Had this been a kinetic coup, a military type coup, can you imagine a cadre of generals using our Air Force and fighter planes and tanks to remove the government? That because of the nature of the means used against the president, i.e. surveillance, telephonic tasking, legal maneuvering, people understate the danger. They underestimate the danger associated with the precedent that these guys are setting.
It's a real possibility that we lose this republic.
We are either going to bring back the rule of law, get the immigration thing under control, and recognize that we have an emergent, new power to challenge us on the global scene, perhaps in the form of communist China, or we're going to go the way of Europe and the long, slow, whimpering death.
Yeah, I think if you want a sneak preview of America's future, if we don't get these issues under control, you can go take a look at what's happening in parts of Western Europe. You now have major European cities where the natives are in the minority. Right, you have Frankfurt, where Germans are the minority. You have London, where British people are the minority. They're now ruled by a Muslim mayor. You have Malmo in Sweden, where Swedes are a minority. You have Antwerp in Belgium, where Belgians are a minority. And this is happening all across the Western world. So the West, what we used to call the free world, Western Christian civilization, is being de-Christianized. And I think the Prime Minister of Hungary has really hit the nail on the head here with what happened. He said, in his words, there is a treasonous conspiracy of internationalist fanatics in Brussels, he was talking about, where the European Union is headquartered, who seek to use this massive wave of immigration that they've created to undermine the nation state, destroy Christian civilization, and bring about this regional and then this global government. He's exactly right. That is exactly what is happening.
Putin has really been quite bright. If he was bombing Syria to get the immigrants up and moving, move them into Europe, from Europe, the United Nations, which is dominated by the Marxists and the Islamists, pick up this program and then flood them into the U.S. with lots of money, and Obama being sensitive toward ideas of socialism and Islam. I mean, this is a strategy that seems to be used as a Trojan horse for destroying our capitalist system, redistribution of wealth through these social programs, as we've been talking, and then to de-Christianize the West and to use the Islamists as the junkyard dogs of the globalists and the Marxists to destroy the West and Western values and Christianity. Would you agree?
Absolutely. Putin, I think, without any doubt, is a key player in this whole agenda for a new world order, in de-Christianizing and breaking down Western civilization.
Experts say that Russian hackers found a way to hack our utilities, and the hackers may still be in there, waiting to strike.
Go after their power, go after their water, and you can bring a nation to its knees.
The Department of Homeland Security and the FBI detailing a 2-year multi-stage effort by Moscow targeting the U.S. energy grid.
They're identifying targets, they're positioning malware so they could pull the trigger when they wanted to.
Experts see the intrusion as a possible precursor to an unprecedented Russian cyber attack that could, in the event of war, devastate the U.S. Energy Secretary Rick Perry warned Congress that the U.S. isn't ready.
I will tell you that I am not confident that the federal government has a broad strategy in place.
An issue that I think is of grave importance. What happens if the electrical grid goes down, and is it easy to take it out? And who might take it out? And what can we do to protect it? This is a very, very important program as far as I'm concerned. So I've brought in the best who I can think of. Dr. Peter Pry, how are you, sir?
Thank you for having me, sir.
My honor. I consider you the foremost expert on this subject.
I think World War III has already started, frankly.
Why?
Because when you're putting cyber bugs into utilities, that's an act of war, or it should be regarded as such.
Tell me quickly about Vostok 18. You said on our radio show last week that this was perhaps one of the largest military exercises in world history?
Yeah, it may be the largest military exercise ever executed in military history.
With Russia and China?
Russia and China cooperated in a joint military exercise that involved 300,000 troops, 36,000 tanks and other vehicles, 36,000, 1,000 aircraft and 80 ships. And that's just the publicly advertised part. This exercise involved a thermonuclear war against the United States. In fact,
that was what they were practicing.
Yeah, in the course of it was probably practicing an invasion of NATO, Europe, and a thermonuclear war against the United States, because in the course of 1 week they practiced 2 nuclear strikes against the United States. And so they were probably simulating a massive invasion of NATO involving tactical nuclear weapons and using strategic nuclear strikes, including EMP attack, to take the United States out, Russia and China working together to basically conquer the world. It is no coincidence, as the Russians like to say, that just a couple of months before Vostok 18 happened, the Department of Homeland Security discovered that the U.S. electric grid had been attacked and penetrated by Russian cyber weapons. What it seems likely is that these things have logic bombs in them, so that at a point when Russia decides, they could throw a switch and black out the U.S. electric grid using those cyber bugs. This would be the first part of this new way of warfare, and that would be followed by physical sabotage and ultimately a nuclear EMP attack. If the new way of warfare didn't work and they didn't win that way, or if it only worked partially, then you'd do it the old-fashioned way and launch Vostok 18. And I think that's how it would probably work in the real World War III, that they'd try this new way of warfare first, And if they won in 24 hours and wiped us out, great, then they don't have to do Vostok 18. But if it didn't succeed, or succeeded partially, then let the tanks roll and let the nuclear missiles fly.
From a Moscow command center, Putin watched the hypersonic missile leave its launch tube and, according to the Russians, strike a target 3,700 miles away, declaring it invulnerable to intercept. Russia says it can be armed with a nuclear weapon and travel up to 20 times the speed of sound. Without confirming the results of today's test, the Pentagon has acknowledged that America is vulnerable.
We don't have any defense that could deny the employment of such a weapon against us.
Russia first touted their hypersonic missile in March with an animation showing warheads flying towards Florida.
North Korea, with its hydrogen bomb capabilities, ultimately being able to explode an EMP over the middle of the country, electromagnetic pulse bomb.
Yeah.
And you play that out, that could ultimately lead to the death of like 90% of the country. Cars don't work, computers don't work, nothing works without the computer any longer. You said this was the issue that kept you up at night more than any other issue. Is it still?
It certainly still is.
An EMP pulse is a very dangerous threat, and it's a realistic threat. It's something that would basically, if you're not nuclear hardened, it will basically shut down any digital computer that is operating in the range of the EMP. But our nation as a whole has not really looked at EMP. We've not looked at the critical infrastructure that could be damaged by EMP.
Most Americans are blissfully unaware that we've already entered a third world war. It's a different type of war. It's worse than the Cold War in some ways because we're in an economic war. Most Americans believe that the global economy is something that we all share in, and it's an opportunity for investment and growth. Not our adversaries, Russia, China, North Korea, Iran, radical jihadists. They all recognize that America's vulnerability is our economy, and they've been attacking it. They attacked it in 2008 when we saw the stock market crash. Hidden behind there, and I did the Pentagon research on this, was clear evidence Russia and some radical elements in the Middle East wanted to take our economy down once and for all. The Chinese have gotten in on the act as well. China has written a book in 1999 titled Unrestricted Warfare, where they talk about attacking our currency would be more powerful than a nuclear weapon. They talk about hacking our systems, more powerful than a nuclear weapon. We know that China has been hacking everything they can and stealing our intellectual property. They want to take down America's economy. They want to take down our morale. They understand that if they can destroy our economy, they can destroy our future. We're at war. The currency is under attack. We have cyber attacks on a daily basis. We have all sorts of enemies looking, and very few in the American government even have any idea of what to do about it.
They've been Democrats. They finally became liberals, and they were okay with that. They became the left. They were okay with that. And now they're openly calling themselves socialists. It's not socialism. It's Marxism.
Yes.
Make no mistake. Islam is not right now in the middle of everything that's going on in this country, but Marxism is.
Yes.
It's in the middle of the government. It's in the middle of the border crisis. You take somebody like Ilhan Omar. The Americans need to know who this enemy is. They need to know, they need to be informed about this enemy. And she is proving how evil, not Muslims are, but she is proving how evil Islam is. That's what she is doing right now if people will watch her. She is a jihadi from head to toe.
Two of them being Rashida Tlaib, Palestinian-American Muslim congresswoman, and then we have Ilhan Omar, Somalian-American Muslim woman, congresswoman. What do? They have their hands on making laws in this country. Do you realize what that means? As part of political system of a country, as a form of Islamization where you go in and gradually replace the law of the country with Sharia being Islamic law. The only thing Rashida Tlaib had to say was wrap Palestinian flag around her and dance, say as a proud Palestinian, I am the first Palestinian to be elected. None of these two ladies ever mentioned anything about America or being an American. Their entire celebration was down to being a Muslim woman and being Palestinian or Somalian. That's all. That should tell you that they're not becoming a congresswoman to make America safer for us. We are not their priority. The very first step Ilhan Omar took was to make sure to remove a 181-year ban so she can walk in with her headscarf, which is Sharia.
Omar wears a hijab, which according to the Quran 33:59 tells women to cover so they won't get molested. Is her adherence to this Islamic doctrine indicative of her adherence to Sharia law, which in itself is antithetical to the United States Constitution?
Very few Americans are even aware that Hamas is in America. They might hear the news that Hamas is shooting rockets over into Israel, but they're not aware that Hamas is in America. Not only is Hamas in America, Hamas has infiltrated your local police departments, very likely. They've likely infiltrated, to some degree, your local sheriff department. They've likely infiltrated many of the leaders in your religious community. They've likely infiltrated at the highest levels of your state government. And we know for a matter of fact, they have infiltrated at the highest levels of our federal government. In fact, some of their allies and proponents are in the United States Congress. They have openly won elections, and they are aligned with the terrorist organization Hamas.
What I regard as the Islamic movement in this country is largely a communist movement. Now, the communists decided very, very early on that rather than try and suppress Islam in their territories, they were going to use Islam as a battering ram against the West. The AFL-CIO completely reversed itself from opposition to illegal immigration to complete support for illegal immigration amnesty. 100% reversal. And this very quickly became Democrat policy. Now, the reasons the Democrats and the communists want this is very simple, because they have lost so much of their traditional working class base by being such raving left-wing lunatics that they have to import more voters from overseas, and the legals across the border from Mexico are a great way of doing that.
About 70% of households with an illegal alien in them live off welfare and on the backs of American taxpayers. Since illegal aliens are heavily dependent on welfare, once they get the amnesty and the American citizenship Socialist Democrats desperately seek to bestow, that makes them reliable Socialist Democrat voters. After all, Socialist Democrats are the party for taking much-needed money from hard-working American taxpayers to pay for welfare for those who prefer to vote for a living rather than work for one. Socialist Democrats covet political power, and they see open borders, amnesty, and illegal aliens voting as the way to get it. That is why so many Socialist Democrat cities, like San Francisco, are passing laws that allow illegal aliens to register to vote and vote in American elections, regardless of how badly this denies American citizens control over their own governments.
If they can give full amnesty to 11 or 22 million voters, they've basically got the country forever.
In Florida, we elected a governor that is a 100% constitutionalist. He's a strong man. He's a strong man of faith. The people of Florida were fortunate enough and blessed enough to elect him, but by 32,000 votes. And the man that he ran against and that he beat was not a Democrat. He was as far as he could be to the other side. He is a Marxist. He's a Marxist, and that's how close it is in Florida. 32,000 votes.
This is the dialectical materialism of Karl Marx that we've explained before. You have to have the internal conflicts coming into the house. At the foundation of our house is the Constitutional Republic. So if you have the foundation as a Constitutional Republic, and then you have the House, America, you have these internal conflicts coming in that are competing, that are contradictions to the free market system, to the definition of family, to religious liberty, to a legal system that is based on absolute truth. And so you have all of, and you just keep going on in the area of law, science, economics, history, family, social issues, all of these conflicts that come against the cultural morality. until the eternal conflicts begin to change the values of the people living in that house, America. And once their values have changed, they don't want to keep the same foundation anymore. Their values have now so changed, they don't want a constitutional republic. They want democracy, mobocracy, the rule of the 51%, utilitarianism, whatever gives me the most pleasure over pain, whatever benefits the group. No more about individual liberty or freedom. It's about the group, socialism, the group, communism. No longer the law being individuals coming together collectively to defend individual liberty, but now the individual rights are destroyed for the collective good of the group.
Yes.
And you can't do that without the conflict of dialectical materialism. That's it in a nutshell.
The same people that gave you Black Lives Matter are the same people who gave you the concept of white privilege. So Black Lives Matter, blacks are being oppressed, so therefore we've got to accept any demand they make for reparations, for increased welfare, for affirmative action. And if we oppose that, it's because we suffer from white privilege and are unconscious racists. And if we are racists and we promote those views, we are guilty of hate crimes, and hate crimes are illegal and can be shut down. So, and the same principle is applied to the Muslim community in this country. So you cannot criticize Islam because then you're a hater.
If they had come out and said, we're going to put together world government, we're going to put together world socialism, that would have been rejected. But when they, again, used this excuse of environmental disaster, and of course climate change became the real effective tool in that. Started out as global warming, but golly, things started getting colder. So, well, now climate change. So anything that happens in the climate now fits their mold. The city of Minneapolis, the mayor has declared that zoning to protect single-family homes is racist.
Islam and Marxism, they do have the same goal. And the goal is to burn down America as we know it and build their delusional utopia on the ashes left behind.
Many Americans assume that all is peaceful and well with their northern neighbor. But security experts here warn that by welcoming radical Islamists, Canada now presents a danger to the United States. Terrorism expert David Harris, who worked for CSIS, Canada's spy agency, told us a major attack on the United States by Muslim extremists based in Canada is only a matter of time.
Many years ago, I suggested that many of the Islamist extremists might regard Canada as an aircraft carrier from which to maintain operations against the United States.
Canada is becoming a foundational sort of place for Islamists of all stripes, including the Iranians, by the way.
I happen to have been an expert witness in a case called the Havlish case about 9/11, which in 2011 concluded with Judge George Daniels in the Southern District of New York ruling from the bench that not only Al-Qaeda, but that Iran and Hezbollah were co-responsible for those attacks of 9/11. Saudi Arabia and Iran reached a deal, an agreement, whereby when the Saudi hijackers came to and across Iranian borders for the training they did inside of Iran, yes, Iranian intelligence acquired jumbo jet 737, 757 simulator trainers in East Asia that they used and trained on inside of Iran. When they came across those borders, there was some kind of a mark, and that is still classified. We don't know what the mark was, but some kind of mark put inside those Saudi passports so that the Iranian border guards were trained to look for it and not stamp their passports. That is how, when those Saudi hijackers finally went to U.S. consulates in Saudi Arabia to get their visas to come into the United States, not only did no one see any kind of stamps from places like Lebanon, Iran, or Afghanistan, they apparently did not have any qualms or suspicions about these fellows coming to the United States at all, and they got their visas.
And it's about time we wake up to this very real and present danger if we're going to help America win this new Cold War.
We need to do something with the information that we hear. It's not just up to you to inform people. It's not just up to Brannon or Rush Limbaugh.
Let me put it this way. It's time to realize our civilization is at risk thanks to Islamization and red-green axis. So, your choices are sit back, relax, watch it all happen, or stand up, get educated, get involved, and act as we, the people of America, and take back our freedom simply by practicing your God-given rights and understanding our Constitution. It is as simple as that.
Wow, it's amazing. And Brannon, it is not just America that's under attack in all this either, is it? I recently had one of our readers in Canada tell me how bad things are getting there. We've already seen that they've taken Europe. It looks like we're just the next prize on the shelf for them to pick off. We definitely have a government divided, don't we?
We do. We have a government divided. We have a nation divided. I mean, Melania Trump walked out yesterday to speak at an anti-opioid, event about the opioid crisis. I think it was in Baltimore, Maryland, and she got booed by a pretty good percentage of the audience. Now, that would not have even been thinkable during the years of George H. Bush, George W. Bush, Barack Obama, even Clinton. I don't think conservatives would have booed the First Lady Hillary Clinton at the time. There was a respect and decorum for the office, whether you respect the occupant, being the president, you respected the presidency and what it stood for. You respected the First Lady. You certainly would treat her like a lady and treat her with respect. She's not the one that ran for office. Usually when she shows up at an event to speak, she's doing that because she chose to do that. And so obviously there's been a breakdown in civility within the culture that a First Lady walks out to an event, spending her time to come there to speak about the opioid crisis, and she gets booed by a good percentage. That shows you how divided Americans are. We've lost our civility. We've lost our manners. And all of this is a demoralization of the society. And that's exactly what I present in Siege with a former KGB officer. Now, I interviewed a former KGB. There are two former KGB officers in my film. One of them I personally interviewed myself. The other one is one that was interviewed years ago, and he's on video, Yuri Bezmenov. And he goes through the stages for collapsing a society by the KGB. Demoralized, destabilized, chaos, and then the new norm. And really what we're seeing in America is we've gone through that process of demoralize, destabilize, and I think we're in the chaos form now. And what happens is you end up with enough chaos that people will cry out for the government to fix the problem, and they'll surrender their liberties for security and for some normacy. And that's where you end up with the new norm. Demoralize, destabilize, chaos, and now the new norm of big government. This is what they did in Hungary. Now, I go into this in my film Siege at siegethemovie.com. 1948 was known as like the Velvet Revolution. And what they did was they stacked the bureaucracy in Hungary with so many communists that they were able to have a revolution and take over without firing a shot. And that's what happened. I mean, that became the model. The 1948, I said Hungary, I'm sorry, Czechoslovakia. In Czechoslovakia, 1948, that became the new blueprint for the communists around the world. What happened in Czechoslovakia in 1948, the stacking the bureaucracy, or what we would call the deep state, with communists until you could take over, and that becomes the new norm. And that's where we're at today. Most of your bureaucrats in Washington are not conservatives at all.
No, they certainly are not. And even the ones that claim to be conservatives often leave us pretty disappointed, don't they?
A lot of them are actually controlled opposition.
Exactly.
A lot of
yes.
and this is a big, big part of the communist tactic is controlled opposition. Most Americans don't know this. Most conservatives don't know this. When they hear someone speaking conservatively, they automatically assume, oh, he must be one of us. They hear him using religious terms. Oh, he must be one of us. And then they're shocked to find out later that this person has endorsed and embraced liberalism, progressivism, socialism, social justice, neo-Marxism, whatever it might be. Well,
so
the person was controlled opposition from the beginning. This is what Gus Hall, the president of the Communist Party USA, said back in the early 70s, in 1972. They would use front groups and controlled opposition.
So, Brannon, what is your take on Donald Trump and his promise to drain the swamp? And do you think there is any hope for our country going forward? I'm looking at the 2020 elections. It's not going to be a good situation, whichever way it goes. So, what's your take on all of that?
Well, actually, several weeks before Donald Trump was elected on radio, I kept saying this. And then the day after he was elected, I really hit it home. And I said, folks, we're about to enter one of the most dangerous times in American history. And I said, because Donald Trump is not going to be a paper tiger, I don't think. These groups come after him, he's going to fight back. That's his personality. He is not going to let them throw punches without throwing punches back. And he may throw some of the punches first. And so when these groups come after him, he's going to engage them. And he's going to draw out enemies like we've never seen before. They're going to go absolutely crazy when he starts doing the things he says he's going to do. And if he does those things, they're not going to give up the ground they gained under 8 years of Obama without a fight. Well, that's exactly what we saw happen, haven't we? And now we have entered the most dangerous time in American history. That's why the movie's called Siege, the clear and present dangers facing America. We are living in the most dangerous time in American history. And most Americans don't know it because most Americans are so stupid, they don't understand the condition that our country is in. They don't understand the vulnerability. They don't understand that we have terror cells in America. We just heard from a former CIA operations officer talking about one of them who's been put on trial in New York, who's connected to Hezbollah, which is really connected to the Shiite Muslims of Iran. We have terror cells here in the U.S. We have groups here that are communist, Marxist groups that have penetrated us. The former KGB agent I interviewed in the documentary says that we've been flooded with KGB, or what is now called FSB agents here in America, that Putin understands two things for sure: religion and political correctness. And he's using religion and political correctness to bring down America, which is in part why I wrote the book Marxianity, because Marxism and Christianity have merged and is now within the mainstream of evangelicalism. And so I said, watch what happens when Donald Trump gets into office. It will draw out the enemies of America within and without, outside and within America. They will be activated, and we're entering the most dangerous time in America. Well, what have we seen? We've seen people who go to a rally wearing a MAGA hat that have the living tar beat out of them. I have the video footage of them with their bloodied face in our film. You wear the wrong hat, wear the wrong shirt, you're going to get beat. Now we see anti-Semitism rising, Jews being killed in their synagogues. We have Iran who likely already has the bomb. I'm getting a little tired of hearing how they're close to getting the bomb. They already have the bomb, and I have a former CIA operations officer who worked with his good friend James Woolsey, former CIA director, in the documentary explaining the proof that Iran already has the bomb. Now, how many do they have? We don't know how many they have, but they have nuclear weapons. You can be sure of that. We know that Russia is on to sixth-generation warfare. Russia has weapons we don't have. Americans are oblivious to the fact that our military is weak, that is not where it needs to be thanks to Clinton and Obama tearing down our military. We have an expert, Dr. Peter Pry. You saw him for an hour on Mark Levin's TV show. Mark Levin declared he was the leading expert on the topic and brought him in. Well, we happen to produce his TV show and we happen to produce his radio show. He's former CIA operations officer. He served on Homeland Security committees on the Senate side and the House side, I think mostly the Senate side. He is an expert, and he will tell you Russia is on to sixth-generation warfare. They have at least 3,000 nuclear-tipped missiles. 3,000. We have under 200. Some of our missiles, we're still operating on floppy disks. Some of them we don't even know if they will fire. We run them through computer programs and say, well, we did this, we did that, they should fire. We don't know. Russia was violating every treaty we pretty much signed with them. We were following them, which is why we have under 200 nuclear-tipped missiles, and they have 3,000, maybe as high as 7,000. They have the S-300, the S-400, which are intercontinental ballistic missiles on mobile units. They're coming out next year in 2020 with the S-500. They have now a new hypersonic missile system, hypersonic, that skips. It skips. When a missile was shot off, we would know the trajectory. And our computer systems with NORAD could tell you the trajectory and where it was going to land and about when. Now their missiles are so high, they're skipping. They're skipping. They don't follow a set trajectory. By the way, Peter Price says they've probably shaved off about 10 minutes. Depending on where they shoot from, they have about 30 minutes to hit America, Russia. They've shaved off about 10 minutes, so they got about 20 minutes. Well, their new hypersonic missile also has a stealth capability. So we may not see it for 5 minutes, 10 minutes, now or 15 minutes. So now we may have a 5 to 10 minute warning. How are we going to alert the president, open up the nuclear suitcase, get him briefed, and get him ready to respond? I mean, that doesn't even count their artificial intelligence submarine known as the Poseidon, which we showed you video footage of the Poseidon, actual video footage of the Poseidon. It carries a 100 megaton bomb, a 100 megaton nuclear weapon in the artificial intelligence submarine known as Poseidon. Now, they could use this to detonate off of our coast and create a radioactive tsunami that when it went inshore would contaminate. Maybe they're going to use it for that. Probably not. What they're more likely to use it for would be to lift off a EMP and take out our subs. And our subs out there in the ocean are what we need to get communication from the president to fire nuclear weapons. So if they can take out our nuclear subs with an EMP through the unmanned artificial intelligence Poseidon with a 100 megaton weapon, that knocks out our communication systems of our submarines. How are we going to respond? Russia always has had pretty much a first strike scenario. They're not going to sit around and wait for us. They're going to strike if they think we're going to strike. Now, the reality is, as we describe in Siege, they don't want to do that. That's the old way of warfare. What they're going to try first is likely the new way of warfare, which is cyber hacking, infrastructure, EMP. Then, if those things don't work, then they can go the nuclear route. And by the way, they were practicing for that in the summer of 2018. Russia and China carried out what Peter Price says is perhaps the largest military exercise in world history in the summer of 2018, known as Vostok 18. 300,000 soldiers, 36,000 tanks. And what were they practicing? Peter Pry in our docu-movie Siege says a nuclear strike on NATO and America, including rebuilding roads and bridges. That's the old way of warfare. But before that, just days before that exercise, our own government's now admitted that China and Russia hacked into our infrastructure. That's the new way of warfare. If the new way doesn't work, Dr. Peter Price says, quote, let the missiles fly. Now, All of
Well,
that to
I'm
answer
not
your
even.
all that to answer your question. Donald Trump has irritated the living daylights out of America's enemies. I don't have to agree with everything he's done to know he's taking on the enemies of America, the Islamic enemies, the Marxist enemy, the social justice people. Look at who his enemies are. You can define a man by who his friends are and his enemies are. I don't have to agree with everything he says or does, but he moves our embassy to Jerusalem. He defunds to a part Planned Parenthood, UNESCO. He tells the world court to go pound sand at the United Nations. Look, he needs to get this border wall built, fulfill that campaign promise. Supposedly he's put his son-in-law Jared on that. But the guy is doing everything he can while he's fighting for survival and their desire to throw him out of office and literally throw him in jail.
And a lot of times he's fighting his own people too.
Well,
I'm not even so concerned about well, I am concerned, but I'm not as, we need to also be concerned with the indoctrination of our young people, willing to automatically give up the fight and give up the country in favor of socialism. They're being indoctrinated with socialist propaganda every day in public schools.
Yeah. How much time do you have? I don't want to run over.
I got about 2 minutes.
All right. Well, let me just simply say this, answer that question. I have a whole section on brainwashing. I'm going to do a documentary that comes out. We start filming it next month. A new documentary coming out in the spring called Brainwashed America. And it'll be all about how Americans have been brainwashed. But we have a small section on it. And the young people have been brainwashed. And this is very crucial for people to understand what I'm going to say. They have been brainwashed to believe that American values that we all agreed to, regardless of your race, color, creed, or religion, or political affiliation, we all agreed to certain American values, right? The flag, hand over heart, whatever, national anthem, respect for the military, freedom of speech. I may not agree with it, but I'll fight your right to say it. There are certain American values we all agreed to. Well, now what the left has done is taken those American values and they have reclassified them as Christian values, capitalist values, racist values, nationalistic, as in Hitler values, fascist values, Islamophobic values, homophobic values. They've taken American values we all agreed on, and they've classified them to say they're evil, they're racist, they come from Christians and capitalists, which makes you a racist. This is how they brainwashed our kids, teaching them that traditional American constitutional republic values are evil. That's how they've done it.
Yes, I agree. And some of them may not even know, some of those that are doing the brainwashing may not know they're doing it, but I know that a lot of them absolutely know exactly what they're doing.
That's right.
Brannon, thank you for joining us today. The movie is coming out next week. It's siegethemovie.com. You can also find more information at worldviewweekend.com. And just want to encourage you to share this with other people. Get it out there. Share this program far and wide. In fact, why not sit down this weekend and watch it with your family? Also, I'd like to say thank you to our producer, Jared, and to Leighton Howerton, national recording artist, for producing our theme song. Next week's guest will be Peter LaBarbera of Americans for Truth about homosexuality. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next week.